into authentic conversations about ourselves and our community, exploring topics that uplift and inspire us, from personal growth to social change. So grab your teacup and get ready to join the conversation.
And there's more fighting that goes on. She says he eventually kicks through a guest room door. I mean, the way she's describing it, there's no place she can hide, and this fight keeps going on and on and on. And eventually, she ends up going in to take a shower, and she says he comes into the shower. Pants on, she's naked, she's looked in the mirror, she's seen welts developing on her eye, and that he comes into the shower, according to her, slaps her 3 times and tells her to just put some ice on it and leaves her in the shower. It is a horrible, horrible scene that she has painted if it is true. Now, this is her testimony. Again, she's going to be cross-examined tomorrow, and I would imagine there are going to be some challenges from Diddy's team about this story, but it really did just paint this brutal, brutal story from that night. Now, what's interesting, after that night, she does say she goes back to him the next week, and this is a pattern that continues, she says, through August. That is when they had their last sexual encounter with another entertainer, as she puts it. Now, her going back and continually going back to him, we heard this with Cassie, and there was all the debate about whether she should have just left him. Now, she's saying she's going back because she loved him, and that's what she, wanted to be with him. But every time she goes back, she says she ends up having another one of these sexual encounters with other men that she didn't really want to have. That's what she's said all along. This is going to be really critical tomorrow when she is cross-examined, because she does admit this as well, that even though she went back to Diddy every time, what would end up happening, and she described at least 2 occasions where they would be together, she would take ecstasy, he would give her either a pill or sometimes it was in liquid form, and that she would then suddenly, in one case, she said she missed one of the entertainers. She turned to Diddy after taking the ecstasy and said, "I miss Paul." And he says, "You want to get him over here?" And he calls up Paul. They get Paul there. There's another time they flew someone in, Don, that she missed. So she is asking him, she's, according to her own testimony, initiating these instances where they are having these sexual encounters, which she said she didn't want to have, but yet she's initiating it. I would think that she's going to say the ecstasy had something to do with that. I don't know, but that is going to be critical when she is cross-examined, because this is really about whether or not Diddy was sex trafficking Jane. This isn't really about the RICO charge so much, as far as we've heard so far. It's not about that. This is about the sex trafficking. It's also about transporting individuals for purposes of prostitution. There have been several times that she has mentioned them doing that, flying people in for these sexual encounters. So the sex trafficking part, though, that's got to be coercion. And there is even a moment where she says that Diddy used the word, and this was in the summer of 2024, that Diddy used the word coercion. She said she didn't want to do a sexual act with one of these men, and then she took the ecstasy, and Diddy asked her, according to her, "Is this coercion?" And interestingly, after he asked that, she still went through with the sexual act with this other man. So cross-examination with Jane is going to be really critical. We will see where that goes. We're also going to find out tomorrow about the mistrial. But this Jane certainly has revealed a lot about their relationship that we just had no idea all of this was going on, and going on so late into 2024, just a month before he was arrested. So who are the winners and losers today? The winner is the prosecution. And, as far as the sex trafficking, I think, Jane has certainly painted a picture of every time she's with him, it is purely for those purposes. Now, again, like I said, the big question is going to be, was she willing? Was she doing this willingly? She has said that there are many times she didn't want to do it and felt forced into it, or she was drugged. Although the question is going to be, was she forced to take the ecstasy? Did she do it willingly? All of that will be cleared up, I hope, once the cross-examination begins. And then, of course, there'll be a redirect. Tomorrow is going to be a huge, huge day. And we are, of course, going to have all of that for you on the website.
All right. So we are sipping tea with Diddy's trial, y'all. What do y'all think? Do y'all think it was willing of the drugs? Do y'all think it was forced? What do y'all think? We're going to keep it moving with some more explosive testimonies and thoughts on the Diddy trial. Let's get into some sidebar.
We have learned a lot more about the complicated
Remember, when y'all come into the chat,
relationship between Sean Diddy Combs and Jane, another alleged victim in this sex trafficking, racketeering, and prostitution case. From audio tapes to text to payments to Homeland Security searches to extortion to alleged violence. What relationship between Sean Diddy Combs and Jane, another alleged victim in sex trafficking, racketeering, and prostitution case. From audio tapes to text to payments to Homeland Security searches to extortion to alleged violence. What exactly happened in court today, and how does it fit into the overall case? Let's talk to our in-court reporter, Law and Crime's Elizabeth Milner, to get to the bottom of it. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law and Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. Hey everybody, this ain't
Remember, when y'all come into the chat with your teacups up, drop them down and in the chat. Like and
another
subscribe.
Law and Crime legal alert. If you received Depo-Provera birth control shots and were later diagnosed with a brain or spinal tumor called meningioma, you may be eligible for a lawsuit. That's right. Morgan & Morgan is investigating claims that patients complicated. It's complicated by her messages to Sean Combs. It's complicated by her testimony that she was with Combs basically a few weeks up until his arrest. And you also have to wonder, is it also complicated with what she said today, including new allegations of violence that have changed the trajectory of her testimony? So a lot to get into with what happened today. Let me bring on Elizabeth Milner, Law and Crime's in-court reporter who was there for every minute of the action. Elizabeth, so good to see you. Thank you so much for taking the time. I feel like a large portion of the beginning of the day, for the first few hours, was dedicated to the prosecution asking her to elaborate and explain her reluctance to engage in these sex acts. And it becomes a question of whether or not it was her as a girlfriend or partner who just didn't want to do this, or, as part of a relationship issue, or whether it was a crime. This was non-consensual, a form of force, fraud, or coercion used to induce her into engaging in commercial sex acts with men in all different cities. So, Elizabeth, what was the testimony from the first few hours today about this reluctance?
Yeah, well, there was a lot of text messages that were shown specifically to the jurors and the witness and the parties. Unfortunately, we weren't able to see them in the gallery because of a pre-existing order whenever Jane was to take the stand, and that has been going on since last week. So we haven't been able to see exhibits, I want to say, since last Thursday. But we're hearing these text messages as AUSA Maureen Comey and even Jane herself was kind of reading through a number of these text messages, either from her and Diddy, between herself and the escorts. But as far as just her and Diddy, Diddy goes, right off the bat, as we had started this morning, we see a text message between Jane and Diddy from September 15th of 2023, where Jane was texting Diddy on these different phones because he has more than one phone. And Jane would say, should we start looking for Sunday night flights? And Jane said, love and miss you, mine's forever. And Diddy's responding, send me some SHIT of you being a bad girl. And Jane believed that those messages about her sending him something was for her to send sexually explicit videos to Diddy. And Diddy had responded, when is the earliest you can get here? Jane says that she didn't want to send this particular video, and Diddy said something along the lines of, the F, I'm asking you to do this, I have the phones, and those phones being with the phones that they have of explicit videos together. Diddy said, stop it, don't say no to me, and Jane says, well, I'm traveling with our phone, and Jane says that Diddy would record on his two phones, and then his assistants and staff had easy access to it, so they had this separate phone to record their sexually explicit videos together. And Jane was saying in these messages, that phone doesn't look, and I'm paraphrasing here because they go by so fast when they're kind of saying these out loud. And Jane had said, you're using our vids to get erect with someone else. And Diddy said, bye, I was asking you to send something, good night. Jane says, well, I'm not going to New York, you're texting me so that way you can get erect for somebody else. And Jane says that she saw on a podcast that he was bragging essentially about having sex for 48 hours completely with someone else. And so Diddy had told her that no sex was involved on this trip, where he was going on this podcast with another person, another woman that Diddy was seeing, and just kind of bragging about this. And this 48-hour trip that he was kind of talking about was on a yacht, and that Diddy told her that he was going to take her on this specific trip, and that Jane agreed to do a hotel night after he had promised her to take her on this trip, and that he ended up not taking her on the trip. So it seems like it's kind of going possibly into the prosecution's argument, which they believe it's sex trafficking by fraud, where he was promising her to do these things and then she would comply with it, but then he would end up not like taking her out on like special dinners or anything like that. And you kind of can see both sides of this, right? Like where, okay, is it a crime for a man to lie to you? Not necessarily, but according to the prosecution and their argument, they think because that she was complying and doing these hotel nights, that kind of played into their kind of theory of the case. And so then we see more exhibits, text messages from Jane and Diddy, where Diddy is saying, what happened? I'm sad, what happened? Jane is saying, well, I don't want to be used and locked in a room to fulfill your fantasies. We hear about an exhibit from September 16th of that same year of 2023. But this one is a note from Jane's notes app, where she says that she kind of just writes out her feelings similar to diary entries, and then sometimes will kind of copy and paste in them as a text message, where Jane did just that, where she had said, as much as I want to see you, I don't want to be treated like a hoe in a hotel room. And Jane was explaining that she was just writing out her feelings. And so then we hear about more texts between Jane and Diddy, where Jane is saying, I don't want to be used, locked in a hotel room. I'm starting to realize what this is. And Diddy's saying, girl, that was podcast talk. I was alone. I'm tired of your false accusations. I promised on Baby Love, who is his youngest daughter, I didn't have sex. And Jane was saying that wasn't podcast talk, and saying that you made Papa proud. And this was kind of in reference to this podcast where Diddy was kind of talking about this 48 hours of sex, essentially. And Diddy had said, bye, always tripping around me. And so then we kind of see more text exhibits where Jane was saying that she wanted to go back to when they first started dating. She said, I opened Pandora's box. She can't seem to close it. She said, one night of fun turned into our entire relationship. I'm crying as I'm writing this. And Diddy is responding, stop, girl, let's talk. And then he sends her an audio message. And then Diddy can be heard on this particular audio message. So the jury is hearing this. We're hearing this out loud inside the courtroom, where Diddy has kind of this raspy voice, and he's saying that he was sick in bed. The message you sent me, what's the problem? We have an actual open relationship. What's the problem? And Diddy never brought up kind of her concerns about doing these hotel nights. Instead, he just never talked about it in this particular audio message. And so Diddy ended up calling her on a FaceTime and told her what she wanted to hear. That's what she testified to. And Jane testified, he said a lot of things that I like to hear, that he loves me, that he missed me, that he wanted to see me. And so Jane ended up agreeing to go to New York. And this was a trip to New York in September of 2023, where she thought that she was going just for alone time with her boyfriend. And then what ended up being alone time with her boyfriend actually turned into them messaging Cabral, who was an escort that they had used often in their freak-offs. And then Cabral was flown out from Atlanta, Georgia, over here to New York, and that Jane participated in this freak-off with Diddy and, with Cabral, as Diddy kind of watched, and that was what it ended up happening. And so we saw a lot of text messages where she was really just kind of explaining her frustration as far as why Diddy was treating her and making her out to be kind of someone who was only used to fulfill his fantasies, as opposed to the other women that he was kind of taunting out there, kind of to what she was kind of describing in her face a little bit, where she was kind of kept a secret, and that her job essentially was to hire these other men, or to bring these other men for their hotel nights or debauchery nights. And so we saw a lot of text messages from around that time frame where she seemed to be very vocal about voicing her opinion on that she didn't want to do it. But then I think kind of where that area is where maybe it kind of confused the jury is that even afterwards she still did it. And so I feel like when cross-examination eventually happens, that they'll really kind of be like, okay, well, you continue to do this even after you said you didn't want to do this, and you said this, but you did that. And so, overall, a lot of text messages were shown that really kind of voiced Jane's opinion about just not wanting to do these hotel nights anymore.
Yeah, I saw there was some reporting where she allegedly said, "I'm not a porn star. These experiences are desensitizing sex for me. It's been 3 years of me having to bleep strangers." There was another, "You pair me up with some random man, any bleep for your own sick sexual." And there were parts where it looked, I mean, I wonder if the jury will accept, was he threatening her directly, indirectly? I mean, I believe there was one message, "You're burning a bridge that you're going to need tomorrow." And we know that financial control is a big part of this, gifts, cash, rent. But I have to tell you, Elizabeth, my jaw hit the floor. I think a big controversial moment, if we're trying to understand whether or not she was a willing participant or consented to this, didn't she write in a text message to Sean Combs that she consented in the videos of these sexual encounters? Because we know, according to her testimony, that Sean Combs have recorded some certain of these sex acts, and he basically said what? That if people look at these videos, they'll see it was consensual. Didn't she agree with that? Or I might be completely wrong.
So Jane was kind of vocalizing just her displeasure of having to do these wild debauchery nights or hotel nights just with other men, that she always wanted to be having sex with her partner, and her partner being Sean Combs. So she messaged Diddy saying that you place these harmful men on me, and Diddy had responded, "Well, talk to God, I'm gonna pray for you, you're burning a bridge that you aren't prepared to pay for." And Jane said that in the text that she knew that she had consented to being on this tape, but she said she was uncomfortable, but she kept doing this because she loved Diddy, and that Diddy kind of even threw in her face that she appeared to be enjoying it. She appeared to be excited even while she was on these freak-off tapes or these sexually explicit videos. And Jane says, "Well, I'm sorry, I want to feel better." And that was in reference to her just feeling uncomfortable throughout this entire process. And so Jane admitted while she was on the stand that she did watch her own freak-off tapes. And she said that I was being high and following a pattern in the majority of these tapes. It was like watching the same show over and over again. And so this was kind of at a point in, I guess, her and Diddy's relationship where she was really just kind of telling him that she didn't want to be doing these hotel nights anymore, and that the videos were kind of thrown back into her face. But it seems like from her perspective, while she was on the stand, I should say, that she didn't feel as comfortable as maybe the video may have portrayed her to look as more comfortable and consenting in this process.
Yeah, I wonder how much the jury is going to wrestle with the idea. Did she vocalize enough her perceived lack of consent? You know, there was a part of it where she talked about in her notes app, she said she was having PTSD, but was that properly communicated to Sean Combs? It's important for a legal analysis. Now, there was another change in her testimony, because she had testified she's having these problems with Sean Combs, right? They're back and forth on this. And then Cassandra Ventura files her lawsuit in November 2023. What was her reaction to Cassie's lawsuit? And what did she communicate to Sean Combs after that lawsuit came out?
And so I will say this about the prosecution when they were kind of laying this out to get eventually to Cassie's lawsuit, is they were kind of showing us piece by piece, month by month, all these text exhibits, or we were hearing about these text exhibits. The jury actually saw them, but just about how Jane was uncomfortable by doing these hotel nights, right? But then we get to Cassie's lawsuit, and I was really kind of surprised to hear Jane's reaction while she was on the stand about Cassie's lawsuit. Because even in reference before, where her and Diddy would get in kind of these verbal spats with one another, where Jane would kind of throw out, "I'm no Gina, I'm no Cassie." And so I thought, okay, well, once we get to Cassie's lawsuit, maybe she didn't have the nicest things to say about Cassie in reference to her lawsuit. But as far as Jane is concerned, it was actually the opposite of what I was initially thinking. So when we get to the part about Cassie's lawsuit, Jane was explaining that it was all over the place. I almost fainted. In fact, I think I did. And then Maureen Comia asked, well, why? And she says, because there were 3 specific pages that were just harrowing. And mind you, when Jane's on the stand, she is very soft-spoken. Sometimes when she's like testifying, I'm just kind of like, oh my goodness, I need to hear you a little bit louder. But she's very soft-spoken when she's on the stand. But Jane was explaining that she read the entire complaint, and that she said these pages resembled my own experience. I was bewildered. I was in shock. I couldn't sleep. It felt like a nightmare. And so the jury was able to see an exhibit of Cassie's lawsuit that was filed on November 16th of 2023. Jane said previously she did meet Cassie a couple times, but in passing. She said it was around the 2015-ish time frame. So that's notably when when Cassie was still with Diddy. And the two had met at a fashion show and at a Father's Day celebration. But the two never spoke outside of just meeting each other in passing years before she had even filed her lawsuit, that being Cassie. But Jane was saying that she had a lot of sympathy. She says, I can't believe I'm reading my own story. And that was in reference to Jane talking about Cassie's lawsuit. And then this is when she's kind of getting emotional on the stand, a little choked up here, where Jane was explaining that she texted Diddy after. So we heard about a text message, this from November 17th of 2023. It was between Jane and it was between Diddy. So that was the day after Cassie had filed her lawsuit, but also the same day that lawsuit was settled, but also the same day the federal government opened their investigation into Diddy. So a lot's kind of going on in that day unknowingly to Jane. But the text from Diddy said, SMH, I'm stressed and sad. We're supposed to be on the same page. Jane said, well, how can we both be on the same page? And then she was saying that she had to go to the doctor. And then Jane, a couple days later on November 19th, she said, I've been crying for 3 days. I feel like I'm reading my own sexual trauma. You recently threw me up in a hotel for days. God woke me up from this sick trauma. And again, I'm paraphrasing here. There was a lot more in this message where Jane was explaining, I feel manipulated. This was sexual exploitation. You knew this was coming. You made me feel gaslit. You made me feel crazy. Because also remember around this time, everyone, Jane was texting Diddy that she was starting to feel very uncomfortable doing these hotel nights and felt like that was the only thing that she was being used for. Then Diddy, a couple days after she had sent that message about crying for 3 days, Diddy said, call me on this phone. It's important. So then there was an exhibit that we heard about. It's from November 19th of 2023. It was a file. And so I was like, okay, well, maybe it's an audio note, it's a voice note, but it was a recording of a phone call. And so you hear Diddy picking up this phone, or at least answering on this phone saying hello. And then it's weird because it kind of sounds like they're in a car. It sounds like they're outside. It was kind of weird to at first initially listen to this. And so I'm trying to write down everything that Diddy is saying to her. And he is saying, I'm sorry you feel this way. I know we can't talk on these phones. I called and reached out to you. Sorry you feel this way. It was some kinky shit I thought we both enjoyed. I don't want you to feel this way. I'm not supposed to talk on the phone. And then you can hear Jane saying, I've been crying for 3 days, reading it all for word. But what's interesting, Jesse, is that this was a recorded phone call between Jane and Diddy, but Jane said while she was testifying today, she had no idea she was being recorded. She had no idea. She wasn't the one who hit record. She doesn't know how this particular phone call was recorded, but Diddy's on this recording saying, well, everything we did was mutually together. But I think a big question for me is listening to this audio message. I didn't know if he was talking about Jane or if he was talking specifically about Cassie. And so Jane was saying on this recording, well, I'm just effed up right now. It still bothers me. But then you can hear on this particular audio recording just kind of like, at first I didn't know what that sound was, but then Jane had testified that she heard Diddy writing with a Sharpie and a notepad on this recording. So possibly insinuating that he was taking some notes and writing down what she was saying. And so we hear this on the recording, just kind of the scratching of what she says was like a Sharpie pen onto a notepad. And then Diddy's on this recording saying, well, I'm here to help you. You know what I'm saying? Try and take a deep breath, okay? How can I be there for you? Let's get through this together. This was some kinky fun together. I need you to get some rest, please. And then Jane's on the recording saying, I'm going to pray for you. video. Then Diddy's on the recording saying, call KK if you need me. And Diddy asked if Jane was recording him, which is ironic given the fact that Jane was the one who was unknowingly being recorded on. And so Diddy was saying, and so Diddy was saying that he can't talk on this phone, and Jane was saying that she had told Diddy that we were just talking about this, that being the sexual traumas that she experienced, and then obviously with Cassie's lawsuit, it really brought out more things. And then Diddy's on this recording saying, well, you bought me the videotape to look at what we do. Can you get some sleep and we'll talk to you later, or later talk to KK. I need your support, please. If you need anything, call. He said, I need your support, please. If you need anything else, call KK. And then Jane and Diddy spoke on the phone that day. We hear another recording from the same day, November 19th of 2023, still same instance where Jane didn't know she was being recorded. And Diddy can be heard on this recording saying, I really need your friendship right now. I called you back to make sure you're breathing. You know, you don't have to worry about nothing else, and nothing else, implying about her rent, her financial situation. And then Diddy said, please pray for me. I'll pray for you. I need your friendship. And so it was kind of interesting to hear this. I mean, you know, for us in the press and the media, we've all heard Diddy's voice. I think for the jurors, I'm always wondering what's going on in their head when they're hearing this recording, because as much as, you know, the defendant was a little animated sometimes prior to the judge kind of admonishing him, you really never hear from him. And so I'm wondering all the time when we hear him through his mouth, through his words, allegedly, I'm always wondering what's kind of going through their mind as they're kind of hearing this. Before I even saw of them, Jesse, it seemed like they were just kind of listening to all of this listening to this and taking it all in.
Well, I wonder if an argument could be made that will be probably made by the prosecution. He did this purposely because he had consciousness of guilt. He knew the Cassie lawsuit. He knew other people could come forward and say something. And he was basically trying to have her on tape, maybe acting like he didn't know this was being recorded, but having her on tape, taking notes. Everything was consensual. This was just freaky, right? We're all good. You know, I'm here for you. You know, again, that could backfire and be quite problematic in the eyes of the jury. Him recognizing that he needs to get everybody else on the same page to say that nothing bad happened, and that, you know, because he realizes that this could be quite problematic. And it seems to me, because we found out that she was basically with him until weeks before his arrest, she was there for another important event. Didn't she testify that she was there when CNN published the hotel surveillance footage of him purportedly beating up Cassie Ventura, and was also there for his planned response, and was also there I think it came out today, his Instagram apology that he released 2 days after the tape was published by CNN. She was a part of all that, right? She was there for all that.
Yeah, honestly, Jesse, in my notes, when they finally played the apology video that I've been thinking that they were going to play possibly even on day one of trial, I wrote finally, literally, finally with 4 exclamation points. I'm like, when are they going to show the jury this apology video? But yes, around this time, it was May of 2024, CNN released the video of the Intercontinental Hotel incident, and Jane was explaining that around this time that she was over at Diddy's home in Miami at Two-Star Island, and that they were just sleeping. Then one of his sons knocked on the door and said something is happening, and so then Diddy leaves kind of the bedroom area where they were laying down. And then Jane ended up taking kind of her phone out to see what was going on. And she said, well, all I saw was Sean assaulting Cassie in a hotel. And then Jane was explaining that she had watched the video that CNN released, and that what ended up happening is Diddy invited Jane into a huddle where they could kind of, from what she was describing it, as kind of like a PR thing. It felt like that they were trying to find a way to kind of get out there in front of this, come up with some type of response, and that response ended up being a social media video. But to me, I thought it was interesting just the amount of planning and the drafts that this particular video went through before it was published on Instagram, and then obviously it's no longer there. But Jane was explaining that they were trying to come up with this very sincere apology post. They didn't play the video at this point, but then Jane was explaining that the next day Diddy showed Jane a draft of what he would say. And the draft, I thought this was pretty interesting, is that Diddy did address Cassie by name. I think when the video was actually released, a lot of us were like, notably, he did not say her name. But there's a reason for that, and I'll get to that in just a second. But Diddy was telling Jane about the Cassie video, and really kind of going in depth about it in June/July of 2024, and was explaining to Jane that Diddy said that this was the only time that Cassie and Diddy had a physical, violent altercation like that, and that Diddy had told Jane that Cassie was actually the hitter in this situation. Obviously, with Cassie's testimony, we know that not to be true, but Jane said that she gave Diddy final feedback on the apology video, and then she went back to LA, and then she saw the apology video, and then we hear the apology video, and the jurors finally see it. It's something that we at Law and Crime have seen a number of times, but I think for the most part, it presumably has been the jurors' first time seeing this video. And so then you hear Diddy say, you know, it's so difficult to reflect on the darkest times of your life. My behavior on that video was disgusting. I had to go to therapy. I had to ask God for his mercy and grace. I'm so sorry. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm truly sorry. And then Jane said that she didn't feel this apology was genuine, this particular apology video. And then there was a whole objection from the defense. The jury is dismissed. They're given a break. But then we kind of get into why there was an objection by the defense. And so the government came out and they were like, okay, we'll strike the last part of that answer where Jane was saying that she didn't feel like this apology video was genuine in terms of comparing it to the final draft that was posted versus the draft that she saw, where you do hear Cassie's name. I guess we didn't see that draft, nothing like that, but the draft that actually went out to the public didn't mention Cassie by name. But then the defense chimed in about that, and they were like, well, there was talk about naming Cassie by name. Agnifilo told this to Diddy around this time, because Mark Agnifilo was already Diddy's lawyer by this time. He told us in court today, but Mark Agnifilo was the one who was actually like, do not name Cassie in this apology video. Why? Because she's going to be a grand jury witness, and she likely was a grand jury witness around this time frame. And so the defense was like, well, this entire line of questioning is inappropriate. And the government said, well, this is relevant as it's going into kind of what Jane ends up testifying to next, as far as Diddy beating her. But the judge said, you know, I do see the relevance if Ms. Comey is talking about state of mind. But then the defense seems kind of like, okay, well, this is like a confidential discussion. This is privileged communication. And so then Maureen Comey was eventually like, okay, we'll strike it because I respect privilege issues. And so the jury was told to disregard that part about the video not appearing genuine. But when the jury came back from the break, they replayed that video once again. And Jane knew that this was in reference to the hotel video that we have now seen in the trial multiple times. And that the next time she saw Diddy after this video was released was not until June 18th of 2024. And from
Thanks for watching. Remember to show your support by liking, subscribing, and sharing. It's a blessing. Keep your teacups filled and ready for my next upload. Until then, stay inspired and remember, always stay sipping.